Welcome everyone back, or welcome to Accented Dialogues in Diaspora presented by the Diasporic Vietnamese Artists Network, or DVAN. On this edition of Accented, titled Celebrating Women, we will have the honor, in honor of Women's History Month, to talk with children's book author Angela Pham Krans and fashion designer Kathy Minh Bach on their work, their motivations, and their inspirations. But before we get into that, I'm here to give you a little bit of contextual background for what Accented Dialogues in Diaspora is, as well as tell you a little bit more about the Diasporic Vietnamese Artists Network. My name is Philip Nguyen. I'm the co-host of Accented Dialogues in Diaspora, along with Viet, who you will be meeting in a quick second. DVAN, or the Diasporic Vietnamese Artists Network, believes that the stories and aesthetics of a thriving Vietnamese diaspora can unite our global community in its mission to celebrate and foster diasporic Vietnamese literary voices. As refugees, immigrants, survivors, and their descendants, our complex and diverse stories must be heard, and DVAN aims to champion and pass these stories on to empower current and future generations. This show that we've got going on, Accented Dialogues in Diaspora, emerged as a way for us to provide this intimate mingling space, this conversational space, to facilitate collaboration and connections between our community members and Southeast Asian or Vietnamese and Vietnamese cultural producers about their work, stories, passions, and then what they've been up to since and through the pandemic. Nearly 30 shows, and almost 2 years later, we've now going on our third year, we've kept this show going, and we are so grateful to have the support of so many of y'all who have come to all the Accented episodes we've had with all the wonderful guests that we've had. I'd like to take this opportunity now to also introduce my co-host, Viet, who some of y'all might know, is one of the co-founders of the Diasporic Vietnamese Artists Network and the author of the Pulitzer Prize-winning novel Sympathizer, which is currently being adapted by HBO into a television series for 2023. Its sequel, The Committed, the best-selling short story collection, The Refugees, and the children's book, Chicken of the Sea, which was co-written with his son, Elson. If y'all could please give him a warm welcome. Welcome, and Viet, back to Accented.
Hey, Philip, it's good to be with you again tonight. Here, we're going to be talking to a guest named Angela Pham Krans. She is a children's book author, and her first book is Finding Papa, just published in February 2023. And she has a new book coming out that she'll talk to us about as well today, coming out later this year. Welcome to Angela Pham Krans.
Thank you so much, Philip and Vid. Happy to be here. So I feel so honored and grateful that I get to spend some time with you, everyone here, to share a little bit more about Finding Papa.
You know, it's really interesting because I love children's literature when I was a child. And then for the next 30 or 40 years, we don't have to get too precise about this, but I started, children's literature seemed, not relevant to me as I didn't have any kids. And then, of course, I had kids and I thought my life is over. But as it turned out, it wasn't over. And I've learned all kinds of new things being a father. And one of those new things is catching up with children's literature, everything that's been published since basically the 1980s. And it's a whole brand new world out there. A real, I think, generational, cultural, political shift has taken place. And I'm really happy to be here to talk to you about this, Angela. But first, the first thing that strikes me is that you're doing something kind of unusual for a person of Vietnamese descent in the United States. We know all the stereotypes about the model minority and what we're supposed to do. And, every time we have a new guest on board, I ask them a very similar kind of question, because I think it's still so important to find out how you became the person that you are, who is not the doctor, lawyer, engineer, nurse, pharmacist stereotype and the like, and instead became a children's book author. And I have to say, by the way, this first book, Finding Papa, is illustrated by one of my favorite people, Thi Bui, herself a comic book writer and illustrator, and the author of The Best We Could Do, and illustrator of a number of other children's books. So how did you go down this path of becoming a children's book author?
Sure. My parents were immigrant parents, and growing up, because we were home alone a lot, because my parents were working so much, I had a very creative side. I had 3 younger brothers, so we did a lot of creative things to keep ourselves busy when we were home alone. And so I think I've always enjoyed, first of all, I love the children age range. I have a very big family, children of all ages. So I think I've always just kept myself young, hanging out with the younger crowd. I just really enjoy that age group. But, I went to school, went to college, was not planning on being a picture book author. My parents never really forced me to, go the doctor, lawyer, all of that route. But I did go to an engineering school, industrial engineering. And my full-time job is in consulting. So I am a children's book author, but I do that as something I love and on the side, as I also have a full-time job. But I just felt a calling. I was in a training session at work for a whole week learning about Lean Six Sigma. And there was one day in a moment, I had this, I was so unfocused at what was going on. And all I could think about was writing and writing for children. And I wrote all my ideas on a sheet of paper, a scrap paper that I took home and put in a drawer and thought about it. While I didn't see it, I always thought about it, about writing. And so one day I said, you know what, this idea, this desire keeps coming back to me very frequently. And so I wanted to answer it. I want to answer that calling. And so I just started doing research and joining webinars and reading books and a lot of Googling and putting myself out there on social media and learning about what other people are doing. And through that, I learned, that's when I found a different pond, which is when I learned about Thi and about Bao. And I was like, wow, there's so many amazing Vietnamese authors and illustrators out there. And I felt so proud to know that. I guess I never even thought about our Vietnamese community being in a more creative space versus, the doctor, lawyer, everything that you hear about. So I just felt an immense feeling of pride and to be able to work in a field and do something that I love, knowing that also a lot of our Vietnamese community authors and illustrators are doing the same. So it's, I think the desire was always there. And while it's not a full-time job yet, that would be a dream to be able to write full-time. But for now, it's something a passion of mine that I just want to keep burning whenever I get a chance to write.
You mentioned Thi and then Bao, who is Bao Phi, the
Yes.
spoken word
Yes.
poet, who also became a children's book author of A
Yes.
Different Pond, which Thi illustrated. One of the amazing things for me is just how much the world of Vietnamese American children's lit has grown. 30
Yes.
years ago, I don't know if there was very many, if at all, and they weren't written by Vietnamese Americans. They were written by other people about Vietnamese people,
Right.
usually refugees and so on. But in the
Right.
last, I don't know, 10 years, 15 years, perhaps, it's been this whole explosion of Vietnamese American children's book writers and illustrators. Now, I know with Thi and Bao, they both are parents. Now, that may not be a reason they became children's book authors and illustrators, but for me, that was a very important reason to become a parent and to see the world through kids' eyes. Not to get too personal, but I don't believe you're a parent except to dogs. So I'm just
Two dogs.
Yeah, I mean, that's the real thing, right? I don't want to offend book parents out
Dog
there.
mom, for sure.
Dog moms.
Dog mom,
right?
definitely.
I mean, I've asked my husband if I could be a stay-at-home dog mom. I've asked if I could quit my full-time job and be a dog mom. He's like,
sounds
nah.
like a fantasy life to me. That sounds great. More power to you. Half-time dog mom, half-time children's book author is an incredible life. But so where does that impulse come from? If you don't have kids, like where does that impulse come from?
Yeah, I don't have kids. It's, personal question, so personal answer. I struggle with infertility. So it's, while I've tried for 6 years, I don't think that's, the dream that is going to be realized in this lifetime for me. So, but I don't see writing as something that is filling a gap in my life, right? First of all, I feel so grateful and blessed for everything I have. So, not having children or the ability to have children, while it is sad, I don't really have space for feeling sad all the time or pity, right? For a dream that can't come true. But, writing, for me, the passion and the desire to write isn't to fill any sort of gap in my life. It's a little bit purer than that, right? It's just something I enjoy doing. And in fact, I wanted to be a writer before I even met my husband, when I was single and not even thinking about a husband and kids. So it's just something that I find joy in doing. And it's probably the only thing where publishing is so slow, and I'm not a very patient person, but writing is the only thing that I feel like I can actually slow down and enjoy the process and not stress out when things are slow. Because for me, I know everything I do, even 15 minutes of reading someone's book or listening to review, not even writing, I don't ever find it as a waste of time. I take everything I do around the creative process as valuable. And I find peace in it. And so I never feel like I'm rushing or doing. So that's when I know that this is something that I love. It's a calling, and it's not to feel something. It's just this pure desire to write for children and share stories with them.
Yeah, and we definitely want to thank you and your creativity, your passion, this passion project that you're working on, and your just general tranquility with sharing it with us and the folks that are listening in. For the audience, my name is Philip Nguyen. I'm the co-host of Accented Dialogues in Diaspora, presented by the Diasporic Vietnamese Artist Network, here with my co-host Viet Nguyen, and we are talking with Angela Pham Krans about her work, the children's book, Little Papa. Angela, would you mind telling us, our audience, a little bit about the story? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I would love to. So Finding Papa is a story about a young girl named Mai, who, it's okay, Philip. A story about a young girl named Mai who leaves Vietnam with her mom in search of her father, who left before them to find a better life for his family. And so, I think many of our parents, or even many of us on the call who probably went through this trip. I was a child when I went through it, so I don't remember much, but it's a scary trip, right? And some people make it, some people don't. Some people are traumatized or scarred from it. And I didn't want to make the story be scary for children. I wanted to be a story of love and family and of hope and of bravery and of courage and of community. And so I really wanted to weave those themes into the story. So while it can be a scary subject, I weaved in a playful game that Mai uses to help her process her feelings throughout the story from beginning to end when she finds Papa again. So.
Awesome. No, thank you so much for that. And Finding Papa is the title of the book. I mean, how has the reception been with children that you've spoken with or met since your book has been released, which is, I think, in February 2023, right? Like, what's the reception been from children and parents?
Gosh, so much better than I expected. I know there are lots of books out there with animals and funny books and fun books, which kids like to read over and over again. I was like, gosh, the story's about a young girl and a refugee story. Like, will kids want to read it over and over again? Like, how will they receive it? Is it fun? But I've had so many parents send me pictures of their kids reading, my cousins sending me pictures of their babies saying, I want to read this every night, and so it's been really wonderful to see children read these stories and kind of broaden their knowledge of someone who could be their age, who ended up in the same place they did, but the journey started out totally different. And kids are just in awe of the trip. And so it's really amazing to share with the Vietnamese community, with the American community, with just all sorts of folks who've read the story and shared how much they enjoyed it. Parents who may have taken the trip themselves, saying, this is such a great book that I can share with my kids and kind of start that conversation about their own journey. So it's been more than I could ask for.
My first children's book is called Chicken of the Sea.
I read it.
And it's about,
So cute.
thank you so much. But I take no credit for this book because my 5-year-old son, Ellison, came up with the idea, which is about bored chickens on the farm who decide to run off and become pirates. You know, so not a serious topic, but also not something that I, as a serious adult, could ever come up with. So it's really interesting, you know, the sketch that you've laid out about what children's literature covers, because it can cover everything from the silly and the fanciful and the fantastic, which is amazing. And then it can be also covering stuff that deals with real life issues and worldly issues. So my next children's book is about, you know, children running from forest wildfires in California. I think there's enough room in the world of children's literature for this whole span of possibilities, because my experience with children is that they have very capacious imaginations. But have you met you know, not I wouldn't say resistance, but just you know, children who are startled by having to confront some of these more serious issues? Or have you had unexpected reactions from children that you've had to deal with?
Around finding Papa?
Yeah, around finding Papa.
No, not yet. It's still only been a month since the book has been published, and I plan to do a lot of school visits. So I would be curious to see other kids' reactions. And actually, one of the school visits I'll be doing is with a girls' refugee school, so school for girl refugees. And I'm curious if the story will, you know, trigger some emotion that or trauma that is there. You know, in a way, I hope not, but in a way, I hope maybe so. So for folks, for children to be able to process their feelings. And I think that's why, like you said, there's such a wide range of books today about death, about divorce, about, you know, death of a pet or a grandparent, or moving. And so their kids, I think, they do go through a lot of trauma, and they don't make that choice, right? You know, like if you think about war today and parents leave, children don't have a choice or a say in any of that, right? They're just brought along. And so I think having books for children to help process that. And, you know, when I have a lot of friends who reach out and say, hey, do you have books about death or about this specific topic, or about a grandparent having Alzheimer's and losing their memory? How can I help my child through that? So I feel like books are a great way for children to read and see that there are other people in the world who are going through similar things or have gone through similar things, and that they're not alone. You know, I think sometimes when children are going through it, they think they're the only one, but to be able to see what they're going through, be in a book that, you know, shows that others are going through the same, and hopefully the book and other people's stories could help them heal in a way.
Absolutely. I mean, I when I was growing up, again, I don't know what your experience was reading children's literature when you were growing up, but I don't remember a whole lot of children's literature out there to help with various kinds of social, personal issues or anything like that.
Not even for my generation. I don't think there was a lot of children's literature out there that dealt with topics like trauma. So yeah, I can only imagine.
It seems like, is it a relatively recent phenomenon where, you know, now we've had both children's book writers, but illustrators, but also publishers increasingly attuned to the needs of culturalism and diversity and so on, but also, as you were saying, trauma and the various kinds of life experiences that children are exposed to. Because, for example, I've visited, you know, refugee programs for children, and they're already writing their own stories down, and the stories are pretty horrific about what these kids have been through, right? So on the one hand, there's the issue that you raised, which is that parents who have been refugees can use these books, your book and others like it, to open conversations with their kids and talk about experiences that their kids don't know about, but their parents or grandparents have been through. And then there's this whole other world where children have been through these experiences. Now, I've seen adults break down when they have to talk about their own traumatic experiences. So I raise these issues because it's just so powerful and amazing that children's literature can also help children with these things as well.
Yeah, I feel like it also helps adults. I loved reading children's book, and I do a lot of it as mentor text and to study and improve my craft. But I feel like even some books I've seen as adults read to their children, I think it's also very cathartic, healing experience for them, because I think the beauty of children's book is that you're sharing so many things in so few words. So you're allowing the person, the reader, to fill in those gaps, and I think that's the beauty of it. It's like when you're watching a movie and if you watch a movie that tells you everything that's going on, everyone's thinking, you're not implying anything. You're not using your imagination. I don't think you enjoyed as much as a movie where you, as a viewer, are allowed to use your imagination and to use, when you're implying or assuming that something is happening. So I think that's the beauty of a picture book. Few words, but says a whole lot about the story.
We might also have to use our imagination a bit since we're on the airwaves and not able to necessarily view the images, but it's an illustrated book. You collaborated with Thi. Could you talk also a little bit about that process, working together with her, the lyricism in your work going with her art?
Yeah, great question. As you already know, Thi is amazing since you've already talked to her and your friends. It was such a great process working with Thi. It was so collaborative. For me, when I write a script, I always try to be very respectful to the illustrator in terms of allowing that space for them to fill in the rest of the story. Thi's creative mind and her illustrations was all Thi. And I was just lucky enough to be able to see her illustrations along the way. In the beginning, she reached out to me and asked for pictures of my parents, of the clothes they wore, of the village back then. So I did try to send her some old pictures just to give her some reference. But truly, it was, Thi who really told the other half of the story through her illustrations. The only thing I was hoping for was that because I wanted Finding Papa to be a story about love and hopefulness, I wanted the color palette. I was hoping the color palette would be more, vibrant and, happy colors. And she did just that. I mean, as you can see, her illustrations are just so beautiful. Her colors are wonderful. And so, I wanted to balance. I was hoping that there would be a balance between some trauma and scary journey with beautiful illustrations and hopeful colors. And I think that was accomplished. So super happy. And, Thi is just so talented. So there was really no doubt. I, just she did her magic. So.
What about your own writing process? Like from start to finish, how long did it take for you to come up with this narrative? Like how much of it was inspired by your own life? And then to the moment when it was published, how long did the project take?
It took about 3 years from when the editor purchased it to being on shelves, because Thi, who is so talented, was, I think, busy with another project, so she couldn't start on the illustrations right away. But my writing process, I interviewed my parents. While it's fictional, I wanted to make sure that I want to capture certain true life events. So I sat down, interviewed my parents, asked them about what happened, the whole entire story. And then from there, I picked and choose which elements of that story I wanted to include. And then this is the only time it's happened to me ever. But I sat down at a Starbucks and wrote the first draft of Finding Papa in a couple of hours. And of course, there were endless revisions, but the backbone of the story was there. And that has never happened again with any other story I've written. It's been, lots of painful putting myself butt in seat and just write. But because I think it was so close to my life and my parents, and I just felt it. And then the words just kind of flowed from my heart to my hands and then right onto the paper. So it was a very joyful experience writing this story.
I come mostly from the world. This is Viet and Nguyen, by the way, co-host of Accented Dialogues in Diaspora with Philip Nguyen. We're here talking with the children's book author, Angela Pham Krans, about her new book, Finding Papa. And we've been talking about the writing and process and the collaborative process of creating a children's book. One of the things that fascinates me as an author, mostly of books for adults, which means books with lots and lots of words, is how short children's books are. It'll take me, 8 hours, 10 hours, 20 hours to read a big fat adult novel. And I pick up a children's book and I'm like, I can read this in 10 minutes.
Yeah. Probably
Well,
less.
I don't want to, you know, and then we talked about the writing process. You know, in the case of Finding Papa, you wrote it in a couple hours, but other books that you've written or other manuscripts have taken a very long time.
Yes.
I'm interested in that issue of length when it comes to children's literature, both in terms of reading and in terms of writing.
Mhm.
For me, when I look at children's literature, the best of it, I think of it as not just short fiction and tales and stories, but also poetry. And then when
Mhm.
you get into the realm of poetry with the language of children's literature, it actually really is hard to do. It's one reason why I'm not a poet, because being a poet is in one way a lot harder than being a novelist, because you have much fewer words to
Yes.
work with. So I'm wondering if that speaks in any way to your creative process as you're trying to figure out, you know, you don't have 100,000 words to write a children's story. You have like
Mm.
maybe 500 words or 1,000 words at the most. What is that like to try to, you know, find a way to tell a whole story in so few words?
It's hard. My first draft always has too many words. And then in the revisioning process, it's when you start to cut. And I think you have to learn that every word has to count and every word has to move the story forward. So if it's not needed, cut it. And then I'll send it to my critique partners and they'll say, you know what, you could cut some more. So there's a lot of cutting and killing of words until every single word within that story has a role in the story. So you have to choose your words with discernment. A verb, you have one verb, different ways of saying things, but which one should you choose that has the most feeling, that tells the story in a clearer way? So I will say it's hard, but I think, with everything, practicing, learning, I read a lot of picture books. I borrow books from the library. I buy books from other authors in support of their work. And I just read a lot and I see their craft and how they write their stories and different techniques that they use to move things forward, scenes forward. And I apply some of those techniques into mine. So I will say it is difficult, but I think part of that writing process is just always having to revise until you're at a good spot.
I do tell, you know, people who want to be writers that one of the things that make you a writer is, besides writing a lot, is reading a lot. Like you actually
Yes.
have to read widely, you have to read deeply in your
Right.
area so that you know what's been done. So you can figure out who your influences are, who are the best in your field that you really appreciate. But
Yes.
you also have to figure out who you don't want to emulate, because when you read deeply into something, you know that there's good things and bad things. So I'm going to ask you a question that might require some diplomacy on your part. You know, who have been your influences? You've read deeply. You said you read deeply in children's literature. So who have been your influences? And then what are some things that children's book authors shouldn't do that you find to be cliche? Because once you read deeply into a field,
Yeah.
you know what the cliches are and you know what you should be avoiding.
Yeah.
So who are your influences,
Ooh.
what are the cliches? What are some cliches that you should avoid?
Gosh, so many authors. I will start with like my critique partners who when we first met, none of us were agented nor sold any books. And now, the circle of ladies that I've been writing and critiquing with all have agents in multiple books. And so like Brianna Karzu, DK Ryland, they have all books coming out, Rachel Michelle Wilson. But I would say just like even classics, books like Mo Willems. I don't know if your kids have them, but they're like the Piggy and Elephant books. Very short, very short to the point. Kids love them. And there's like maybe a total of, 20 words in the book. And I would say the themes is when you're writing a book, I think the biggest mistake people make, especially new authors, including myself, something that I had learned, don't go in trying to teach a lesson. We're not going to teach kids a lesson. What they can get out of the story is the lesson that they learn. But if I'm writing a book about, you have to respect your parents, I'm hitting that theme so hard in the story, I would say that's a no-no and more of a turnoff. Like you're not trying to preach and teach kids. Your story, you're telling a good story. And through your storytelling, they are grappling themes and ideas and they're pulling it and putting it together for themselves. That's what you want your kids to take away, themes, but not like a life lesson, like kids, you shouldn't do this. Kids, you need to do this. And so I try to avoid that. And I think a lot of experienced writers avoid that as well.
I just want to share my appreciation because I think, now I'm thinking, reflecting back on how I coming from a Vietnamese woman, how I was really told to like what to do or what not to do all the time. And that kind of like turned me off in a lot of ways, right? Or like really, I perhaps didn't respect the words that my mom was sharing with me.
Yeah.
As much as I probably should have, now looking back. But Angela, I also want to ask you, for our audience, for our listeners, if you wouldn't mind sharing maybe a part of the story with us to hear.
Yes, and if you can give me 1 second, let me grab the book from the bookshelf.
Yes, for sure. And you can find Finding Papa by Angela Pham Krans through HarperCollins Publishers, as well as at any bookstore near you. This is Philip Nguyen with Accented Dialogues in Diaspora, presented by the Diasporic Vietnamese Artist Network, here with my co-host Viet Nguyen, and we are speaking with Angela Pham Krans on her book, Finding Papa. And we're going to be hearing from her soon.
All right, thanks, Philip. So I'll just read, 5 or 7 pages from the book and allow you to use your imagination around Thi's illustrations, which are beautiful. Finding Papa. Mai's favorite game to play with Papa was the crocodile chomp. When Papa went chomp, chomp, Mai would giggle and squeal. Crocodiles were scary, but Papa was not. One morning, Papa gave Mai a long hug. It was longer than usual. Papa gave Mama a big kiss. It was bigger than most. Goodbye, Papa. Goodbye, Mai. Then Mai watched Papa walk down the village dirt road. Papa always waved and smiled at the end of the road, but this time, Papa cried. Papa did not come home for dinner. He did not come home for playtime either. Chomp, chomp, Mai said to herself. By bedtime, Mai was crying. Where is Papa? Papa's finding a new home for us. Mama's crying too. They hugged each other until they fell asleep. Mai waited and waited for Papa to come home. He never arrived, but his letters did. Some were short, some were long, but Mai and Mama loved them all. I want to see Papa again, Mai said. Soon, Mai, Mama said. One night, Mama packed a small bag. Where are we going, Mama? We are going to find Papa. And there begins their journey. And so, if you would like to hear the rest of the story, please go out and support your authors and illustrators.
And your local bookstores.
At your local bookstore.
Even though we didn't see the pictures, I could still see very vividly in my mind the story that you were conjuring up. But the other thing that I've seen in terms of being a children's book author, of course, is that it's a collaborative process. And so I'm assuming as you write the story, you're aware that someone's going to come along later to do illustrations, and then the illustrations do additional work for the story. So when you're writing the words for the book and you're aware that there are going to be these illustrations coming along, how does that affect your writing process? Does that make you decide not to describe certain things because you know that the illustrator is coming to do that work for you?
That's a great question. So we talked about, having so they say picture books should be like around 500 words. That's not a lot of words. And so to your point, the illustrations do all the talking when it comes to description. So I don't say the sky is blue or the sky is green, or, someone has blue eyes, unless that's important to the story. So, I write in a way where I'm describing action, and what the character's doing. And so, all the illustrations really provide the setting and the colors and, what Mai is wearing, what Mama is wearing, the emotions on their face. So, I can say Mai is crying, I use certain words. So obviously certain things like when, Mai's crying or Mai is sad, or when she goes chomp, chomp, T can take those words and translate it into pictures, but then she has a lot of space to really fill in the rest of those pages. And I think how she interprets the story through the words, through my words, and then translates it to her illustration. I think that's the beauty of it, because then it's like a story that I don't know about the other half of the story. Like I'm only writing one half of the book, and then she illustrates, and then we're like, whoa, you have a whole book that now makes sense. Before it's just words on a page. So I just have to be cognizant that I leave her space to do her thing.
And this is your debut children's book, right, Angela?
Yes.
And you got your second children's book on the docket coming out later this year,
Yes.
Words Between Us.
Yes, Words Between Us, out in October this year. It's about Felix, a young boy, and his grandmother teaching her English. So it's the language isn't as lyrical as Finding Papa. It's a little bit more fun, and they consider a little bit more commercial. Illustrations are by Yung Ho. She lives in Saigon. So another wonderful Vietnamese author. So really been happy, grateful, honored to be paired with other Vietnamese artists, to bring our books into the world. So I'm really excited about that one. It's, a lot about love and language and the courage to do something new, and just that relationship between a child and grandparents. That, a lot of kids today, they're speaking English, their grandparents are speaking Vietnamese to them, and that's how they communicate. They speak English to their grandparents, and their grandparents are speaking Vietnamese back at them, but somehow everyone understands everything for the most part. And it's such a beautiful relationship. So I wanted to highlight that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Angela. And with our last question for this evening to ask you, I kind of want you to ask you, thinking back to then when you were growing up, let's say you're about the age of someone who is reading your children's books,
Yeah.
looking back to that former version of you, are there any words, sentiments, những lời khuyên in either Vietnamese or English that you would want to share with that younger version of yourself?
Yeah, I think would be, listen to yourself. I think there's a lot of voices, things that we should do, things that we could do, things that we need to do. And a lot of these voices, I think, are coming from other places, school, teachers, parents, and they all come from a place of love. But I think sometimes we forget things that we must do for ourselves. And I think sometimes when you listen to that voice, even if your profession isn't on the traditional trajectory that your family or yourself even have, I think just having the courage to explore and listen to your heart, and to follow it, because I think that takes a lot of courage, doing something that's untraditional and unknown. So yeah, I think just believing yourself, have some grace, and just follow that voice. If you're hearing it, follow it.
Those are great words for us to end our conversation with. We've been speaking to Angela Pham Krans. She's a children's book author with Finding Papa, her debut children's book. She's also been talking about her forthcoming children's book, Words Between Us, coming out later this year. I think she is absolutely right. It takes courage to pursue your dreams, your passions, your ambitions. And it's not a guaranteed path to happiness, but not pursuing your dreams and ambitions is a guaranteed path to unhappiness. So that's my little bit of wisdom for today. Angela, it's been great to be able to talk to you with Philip Nguyen here about your career as a children's book author.
Oh, thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate your time. It's really been an honor and so wonderful to meet you and talk with you. Thank you for having me.